Hey, good morning, everyone. It is 5:22 a.m. July 12th, supposedly 2017. I want to thank everyone who has stuck with me on this third installment of the reading of Michael Hoffman II's book, They Were White and They Were Slaves. As I stated in previous videos, anyone who chooses to get this information out in front of more people of all kinds, if you have friends that are black, that are Hispanic, Asian, whomever, because I think that what Michael Hoffman has done here is so important in setting the record straight concerning the history of our world, especially in the last 500 years, so that the people who are being used by the elitist, usury charging fakers to oppress and keep the whites of America and Canada, Europe, South Africa, all the white nations, to keep them in a state of guilt, as if we have anything concerning these other peoples to be guilty over. It's a good thing to set the record straight, because these countries, which all the other peoples of the world have for hundreds of years now tried to come to integrate into, because they saw the goodness that was in these places, because these countries were blessed. They were blessed because our ancestors chose to walk in the paths of Yeshua, the Messiah, and keep the laws of Yahweh, the God of Israel. So, for any of you that wants to take these videos that I've made reading Michael Hoffman's book and cut out my commentary, if you want, and just put it all together, just the parts reading, and reproduce it on your own channel or whatever else, please do. Because this is such important material just for the mentality of all of the white people, not only in the United States, Europe, South Africa, Canada, Australia, who have been convinced over a lifetime now that they are at the root of the problems and sufferings of other peoples, other races, nations, languages, tongues, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, before I get into it today, there is a couple of things that I'm going to read to you out of the Bible, illustrating a point. And I was going to comment on something else. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of identity. And as I've said in the past, identity is it is a faction, it is a sect of the Christian church. And the thing is, there are some in identity that have some doctrines, some viewpoints that I do not agree with. I can't tell you right now that I ever will. But I don't really close my mind to any information and any truth, nor do I think that I've got everything figured out. So there's no need to look into these things and discover. But the thing is, if you're listening to me, if you have already or will soon discover that you are a blood descendant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel, My advice would be the last thing you should do is to take pride in your flesh. Just because we're the descendants of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this does not in any way mean that by default we will be saved no matter how we behave, believe, or conduct ourselves. If this were the case, Yahweh would not have killed so many of our forefathers in the wilderness and after. You see, he would not have described the house of Israel as a whore and the house of Judah as a bigger whore. A couple of prostitutes is how he describes the two houses. So do not become arrogant in your flesh, but fear and glorify the God of our fathers, and understand that once you know who you are, who your fathers were, that to us, as Paul states in Romans 9, to Israel pertains the adoption, the promises, the giving of the law. You see, from the start, we've had a responsibility to take and keep the message of our Father. And since Christ has come, to carry the testimony of him to the world, all tribes, all nations, all languages. Because in our Father's eternal wisdom and great plan, he has chosen to save many, many Gentiles, those who are non-Israelites, in a very vast way since the coming of our Lord. That would be the time of the Gentiles. And when that is full, and all they have come in that complete the fullness thereof, then of course he will, in a very full, complete way, show Israel who they are and cause them to repent and return to him with a full heart so that they can fulfill the role that he has always had intended for them. I find it amazing that people who have, I guess you could call it, a Calvinist bent, where they believe that the God of the Bible does elect certain people based on his good pleasure, perfect will, and purpose. But then when you tell them, well, there is a large group of people that are provably the descendants of Israel, and God is not done with them. Yahweh still has promises he will fulfill to them and in them, in Christ, not apart from Christ. Then they get all uncomfortable with the subject all of a sudden. They're okay with believing that he elects whomever he chooses from eternity past, before the foundations of the world. But then they get all uncomfortable when they start considering, how about his election of Israel as a nation and as a people? It seems to me that the programming that has been instilled by those fakers, those Khazarians, those perhaps Edomites, who have risen to great stature and places of power in this world have really done a number on the minds of Christianity in general, and most specifically Israel, because there is a difference between all those other groups who believe that they're Israel and those groups who go by the moniker, which I don't like monikers, but you're going to probably get one no matter who you are. They go by the moniker of identity when it ought to just be Israel. And by the way, I am going to stick this in there. Remember the teachings of Paul that not all those who are of Israel are Israel, and not all of those who are Abraham's seed are sons. That's part of the wonderful plan that Yahweh has implemented since Christ made his perfect sacrifice and ascended to his right hand, is that many tribes, nations, languages, and tongues would come into the kingdom and be part of Israel. Again, another reason to not glory in your flesh. But there's a reason why those people who identify as identity are considered more dangerous by those who are called the Jews today. It is because, there are many factions out there that believe they are Israel, or believe at least they are the replacement of Israel. The entirety of Protestantism and evangelicalism, they basically believe not that they are physical Israel, but that they are the replacement of. Mormons believe that they are Israel. Many other sects within, I guess, the umbrella of Christianity believe that they are Israel. The thing that distinguishes identity from all the others is the fact that identity, and even though I don't like the monikers, I'm going to say that I also hold this point of view. They clearly point at those people that call themselves Jews, and they say, that is not the tribe of Judah, nor Benjamin, nor Levi. That is the synagogue of Satan. They have no relation to the 12 tribes. Are there some of Judah and maybe Benjamin, Levi, or other tribes mixed in to what today is Jewry? There may be. Maybe some of them are what are known as Kirites, although they still reject the messiahship of Christ. And so, again, they still have no business occupying that land in the Middle East. Okay. Either way, what makes identity dangerous to the synagogue of Satan is the fact that they are the few people who not only say that they are Israel, and that means for real Israel, not just spiritual, but spiritual and physical, but they also say that the synagogue of Satan, Jewry, Zionism, these Kabbalists, all of these people who identify as JEWS have absolutely no relation whatsoever, not only to Judah, but any of the other tribes of Israel. That's what makes identity so dangerous to them. They're okay with all of the other ones because all the other ones think that they are the tribe of Judah. And you'll remember, I hope, the prophecy of Jacob to Judah, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. And that's what they want. But they're not Judah, neither physically nor even spiritually. And there's much to be said about physically because, remember, only the Levites could serve in the temple as priests. Only the scepter would be held by Judah and by David, and now by Christ Jesus alone. So there's two passages that I'm going to read out of the Bible before I start back in with Hoffman's book. One of them is to address a passage that may be a contention from some people because of how much I have been, and I'm going to continue to talk about how good and how sustaining to a people the laws of Yahweh are. Now, some may say, but wait a minute, what about 1 Timothy? Starting in verse 5, Paul writes to Timothy, who was not a pastor. These are not the pastoral epistles, unless you want to consider him the pastor in the sense that he was there trying to organize and shepherd these people until he could get good, competent shepherds installed who could continue to do so. Timothy was an apostle of Paul, who was an apostle of Christ. He was there to try to organize and structure the church at Ephesus. He was not there to raise money and get articles of organization with the state, start a 501c3, and then borrow on usury from banks to build a building. He was there to organize the church. That's people. So starting in verse 5, but the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a faith without hypocrisy, from which some have deviated and have turned away into fruitless discussion, wanting to be teachers of the law, although they do not understand either the things which they are saying or the things concerning which they are speaking confidently. But we know that the law is good, if anyone makes use of it lawfully. And then he goes on to say how the law is for lawless people, for lawbreakers. And some may use this passage to try to say that, well, we're in no need of the law. But if you are part of a lawless congregation, a lawless people, in a lawless land, then you're going to need to know what the law says because you've strayed so far from it. Saying things like, thank God we are under grace and not under the penalty of the law. It's a non sequitur to say then that the law has no use. That's ridiculous. The law has full use today as it ever did, because the heavens and the earth will pass away before one jot, one mark of the law should pass away. And if we would just keep the law and honor Yahweh's laws, judgments, statutes, ordinances, we would be blessed. But we are lawless. And we've been so lawless for so long, most people don't even know how lawless we are. It takes so long to try to impress on someone the great evils of usury because we don't know how lawless we are, because we don't know the law. So how are we going to know how lawless we are? And what is sin? As per 1 John 3:4, sin is lawlessness. So we know the law is good. And who are those who use it lawlessly? Well, does Talmudic Jewry ring a bell? They use it lawlessly. The law is good if it's used lawfully. That's correct. And if it is used or taught or implied or implemented without love, then yes, I would have to say truly, the people doing so are definitely missing the point of the law. For Jesus said, the core, the heart of the law and the prophets is to love your God with all yourself, all your being, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is the point of it all. So, since I spent a good amount of time actually reading about the factory system in 16th, 17th, 18th century England, which was abhorrent, even as compared to the slavery in the United States, it was abhorrent. Our ancestors. This is what they went through. And are they crying for reparations? Or are they getting up each day, going back to work, and supporting a lawless country who thinks to look at us and revile us and blame us for them having warmth and food and protection? It's madness. It's absolute insanity. But given all those things, and how I said yesterday that it is the law that would protect people from all of these atrocities committed against them, I want to re-illustrate this. And I'm going to actually just read Exodus chapter 22, and then I'll go right to Michael Hoffman's book to continue on. So I'm going to read this from the, I want to say the ISV, maybe. There's a good reason for it. Yep, that's why. It is because in most other versions, they translate, and actually the King James also translates it, what I believe is correctly. Like in verses 8 and 9, where we would see judges. Most other translations actually translate that as God, because they're not understanding the difference in context between who we are calling the Most High, the Almighty Elohim, as Yahweh, or Elohim, as in mighty men, judges. The ISV, the KJV, the Douay-Rheims, and a couple others, I believe, got that right. I'll just read from the ISV. Exodus 22, verse 1, if a man steals an ox or sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he is to repay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. Now this can go for any property that you have today. It doesn't have to apply just to oxen and sheep, but we can use our brains and understand that there is a value placed on these animals based on the work and production they do for the owner. Verse 2, if a thief found while breaking into a house and he is struck down and dies, it's not a capital crime in that case, which means that the person who strikes him down is not to be tried for murder. But if the sun has risen on him, then it is a capital crime in that case. A thief shall surely make restitution, but if he has nothing, he has to be sold for his theft. Meaning, there would have to be an investigation if it was daylight and you still struck him down and killed him. Because there's various reasons that somebody could say that somebody had broken into their place and killed them when it actually could just be the two were arguing and they killed them. So you have to investigate, you see. Verse 4, if what was stolen is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, he is to repay double. When a man lets a field or vineyard to be grazed over or releases his livestock so that they graze in another man's field, he's to make restitution from the best of his field or vineyard. Again, this can apply to all kinds of things that we have today. Lawnmowers, other kinds of animals. It has to do with the value to the owner, you see. When a fire breaks out and spreads into thorn bushes and consumes stacked grain or standing grain or the field, the one who started the fire surely is to make restitution. When a man gives his neighbor money or goods for safekeeping and it's stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if found, is to repay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house is to appear before the judges to see whether or not the thief took his neighbor's property, or if that neighbor sold it or did something with it, you see, and he's lying. So these are all very good statutes. In every ownership dispute involving an ox, donkey, sheep, garment, or anything that is lost where a person says, "This is mine," the case between the two of them is to come before the judges, and the one that the judges declare guilty is to repay double to his neighbor. When a man gives a donkey or ox or sheep or any animal to his neighbor for safekeeping and it dies or is injured or is driven away when no one is looking, the two of them are to take an oath in Yahweh's presence that the accused has not taken his neighbor's property. Its owner is to accept this and the neighbor is not to make restitution. But if it was actually stolen from him, the neighbor is to make restitution to its owner. If it was torn to pieces, let the neighbor bring the remains as evidence, and he is not to make restitution for what was torn apart. When a man borrows an animal from his neighbor, and it's injured or dies while its owner was not with it, he is sure to make restitution. If its owner was with it, he's not to make restitution. If it was hired, its fee covers the loss. Now, the heading says laws about social justice. Listen up, social justice warriors. When a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to be married and has sexual relations with her, he must pay her bride price, and she is to become his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he is to pay an amount equal to the bride price for virgins. You are not to allow a sorceress to live. Whoever has sexual relations with an animal is surely to be put to death. Anyone who sacrifices to a god except Yahweh alone is to be utterly destroyed. You are not to wrong or oppress an alien, because you were aliens in the land of Egypt. You are not to mistreat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, they'll surely cry out to me, and I'll immediately hear their cry, and I'll be angry with you, and I'll kill you with the sword, and your wives will become widows, and your children orphans. If you loan money to people, to the poor among you, don't be like a creditor to them, and don't impose interest on them. If you take your neighbor's coat as collateral, you are to return it to him by sunset. for it's his only covering. It's his outer garment. For what else can he sleep in? And when he cries out to me, I'll hear him, for I am gracious. You're not to blaspheme God or curse a ruler of your people. Now, again, right here in 28, I'm of the opinion that what he's saying is you're not to slander judges or curse a ruler of your people. That's my belief. You're not to hold back the fullness of your harvest and the outflow of your wine presses. You're to give to me the firstborn of your sons. You're to do the same with your oxen and your sheep. They shall be with their mother for 7 days, and then on the 8th day you are to give them to me. You are to be a people set apart from me. You are not to eat flesh torn apart in the field. You are to throw it to the dogs. And that's all of Exodus 22. Good law. Now, the thing is, just as Yahweh had promised in Jeremiah 31:33, he would write his law in our hearts. And so many of us we don't really have to be told what things are good and how not to defraud one another, for we know that because he has done this as he said he would. But those who are the heathens, they don't have that in their heart. I think it's a mistake to just assume, in a Joel Osteen sort of way, that people are naturally good. They're not. He said he would write his laws on the hearts of Israel and Judah. That's what he said in Jeremiah 31:33. And so, most of us who are of Israel and Judah, we naturally have had that written on our hearts. Many of us, from about the time we were born, we understood these things. Yes, we were oftentimes disobedient, and many of us ended up falling into sin for maybe a very long season. But I, as deep into depravity as I sunk, still knew what was good, what I should be doing, what were the laws of Yahweh. So back to Hoffman's book with the subsection, Human Brooms. Thousands of white children in Great Britain were forced to work as human brooms inside chimney flues and led miserable lives and died horrid deaths. The condition of these chimney sweepers reveals perhaps more than other forms of white slavery the attitude of the ruling class towards the most defenseless and oppressed segment of the surplus white poor. Chimney sweeping had been practiced as a trade as far back as the Tudor era, but the custom of forcing young boys to sweep flues with brushes and scrapers probably did not become general until the 18th century. British cities in the Georgian era were festooned with forests of rooftop brick and mortar. Several flues were usually installed in each of the chimneys of a Georgian mansion to satisfy the 18th century demand for more comfortable indoor heating, a fireplace in nearly every room being the new yardstick of comfort. As the number of flues increased, their size decreased, the average being approximately 10 by 14 inches. Children were essential for the maintenance. The very architecture of Georgian England now reflected the throwaway status of the white pauper child. Like the white children enslaved in the factories, they had been recruited from the workhouses as pauper apprentices. Parish officials tried to get rid of pauper children as soon as they were old enough by apprenticing them to any master who would take them. These included the masters of chimney sweepers, for whom thin, malnourished boys as young as 4 were considered ideal for their facility for entering narrow smoke channels. An 18th century eyewitness to the system of child chimney sweeps, Jonas Hanway, stated that it was, quote, equal to any of the miseries which human nature seems capable of supporting, and if the evil is suffered to reign any longer, it must level us with nations whom we call barbarians, if it does not ultimately draw down on us the vengeance of heaven from improving the lot of the chimney sweeps. Page 30. Chimney sweeping was often little more than thinly disguised slavery. Inglis, page 30. It was not uncommon to send the children up the chimneys while they were still on fire, or to place flaming straw in the grate beneath the child who had entered the chimney but refused to go all the way up. Skeletal deformities and crippling were common, as were fatal accidents. An eyewitness account tells of a boy called to a job that needed to be done in haste. The child entered the flue but quickly came out again, saying it was too hot. The master told him to make as much haste as he could. He was a long time going up. Heard him cry out he was hung to a nail. Heard him crying and sobbing very much. Very near 9 o'clock, having been up about 20 minutes. Never heard any more. Upon asking the boy's master, he sent another boy up after him. He went as far as he could reach his toes. The child said he could not pull him down. He won't come down, master, who said, damn him. The builder who extricated the boy said it was very difficult, as he was so wedged in, and the flue was so exceedingly hot. The flue was 14 inches by 12. That and the soot and the heat, the builder testified, must have caused the boy's death by suffocation. Inglis, pages 136, 137. Those boys who escaped death often contracted cancer. In 1775, Percival Pott observed an overwhelming number of young chimney sweeps suffering from scrotal cancer. He believed that the horrendous disease in these malnourished boys kept thin by their employers to fit down the chimneys was caused by their constant exposure to soot. But the English government took more than 50 years to pass laws to protect them. From Mark Lopp, Chemical Deception, quoted in E! Magazine, September through October 1991, page 55. In handbills and advertisements, the masters of chimney sweeps would boast that they were in possession of, quote, small boys, unquote, for the best work inside flues. Little boys for small flues was a popular advertising slogan. An early 19th century investigation revealed that no child could be found who voluntarily entered the ranks of a sweep. They were all either orphans and indigents sold by the parish workhouses into servitude, or they had been kidnapped or sold by famished parents to a master of sweeps. The boys often had to be forced up the flues with slaps, kicks, beatings, and sometimes fire. On January 17, 1831, John Paisy, 10 years of age, was sent up a flue at the Omnibus Coffee House. Quote, It appears that the brickwork was decayed and that when the boy had reached the top, the whole chimney gave way. The child was found with his skull crushed. March 1832, an 11-year-old boy was ordered by his master, D. Casey, to ascend a smoke-filled chimney. The boy was afraid to enter it. Casey, regardless of his natural apprehensions, beat him until he mounted. The lad suffocated to death. September 1st, 1832, Michael Brian, apprentice chimney sweep to Philip Corbett, quote, was engaged to sweep some chimneys in the house of George Barron, Esquire. He arrived at Mr. Barron's about 7 o'clock, and the kitchen fire having been lighted before that hour, Corbett said it would not be necessary to put out the fire for the purpose of sweeping the chimney, as he would cover it with slack. Having covered the fire with slack, he desired the boy to ascend the chimney and commence operations. The boy immediately obeyed, but before he proceeded many yards, cried out that the chimney was too hot to advance further. The master desired him to rattle away, as the chimney was cool enough. The child continued to ascend with the greatest pain and difficulty. A tremendous blaze rushed up the chimney. The little sufferer succeeded in reaching the top of the chimney and thence the roof of the house. A ladder was immediately procured, and the boy was brought down by Mr. Barron's servants. The appearance of the boy's body was truly distressing, having been dreadfully scorched and burned. He died about 12 hours later. October 10th, 1832. A chimney sweeper named William Cakebread, between 6 and 7 years of age, was employed in sweeping an outbuilt flue at the back of the premises, number 36 Oxford Street, when, from the rottenness of the brickwork, the whole fell with a tremendous crash into the brickyard, just as he had reached the top, and buried him underneath masses of brickwork and rubbish. On being taken to the Middlesex Hospital, he survived only a few hours, when he expired in great agony. January 15, 1834. A small boy was inside a chimney when it burst into flames. Quote, he was speedily conveyed to the hospital, where he remained some time in a state of excruciating agony and died. In May 1839, a boy, William Wilson, was ordered to clean a flue that was still hot from a fire that had recently been extinguished. He was grievously burned and hospitalized for weeks, during which he was described by a caregiver as a meek, gentle little creature. The tears started in his eyes when he was spoken kindly to. From the Society for Superseding the Necessity of Climbing Boys, The Trade of Chimney Sweeping, pages 2 through 20. There are many such cases on record, commensurate with the investigations arising from the founding of reform societies in the early 19th century. Newspaper accounts, reports of humane societies, and parliamentary records contain hundreds of instances of climbing boys injured and killed, beaten and burned, deformed and diseased. From George L. Phillips, England's Climbing Boys, page 4. Since conditions were even worse before the trade came under scrutiny, it is fair to surmise that hundreds of equally fatal or harrowing cases dating from the 18th century went unreported. It is no doubt difficult today to understand the rationale behind anyone sending a young child up a chimney while the fire was still lit in the grate. To grasp the mentality of the, quote, higher orders, unquote, of the society of the time, It is necessary to appreciate the utter expendability of the lives of pauper white children as compared to the necessity of maintaining every luxury for the high-born. One observer, writing in the Edinburgh Review in 1819, stated, "We come now to burning little chimney sweepers. A large party is invited to dinner. A great display is to be made. And about an hour before dinner, there is an alarm that the kitchen chimney is on fire. It is impossible to put off the distinguished personages who are expected. It gets very late for the soup and fish. The cook is frantic. All eyes are turned upon the sable consolation of the chimney sweep. And up into the midst of the burning chimney is sent one of the miserable infants of the brush." Bills proposed in Parliament requiring the abolition of the use of climbing boys, in quotes, under the age of 10, were defeated in the House of Lords in 1804, 1818, and twice in 1819. The Earl of Lauderdale argued against the restraint of the practices of the masters of the chimney sweeps on the basis that, quote, "children should be considered free agents for wage bargaining purposes." Now keep in mind this Earl of Lauderdale, because I heard something recent that is going to tie the Earl of Lauderdale along with folks like Oliver Cromwell into, and of course, the Earl of Lauderdale is a title that is passed down. So I'm talking about someone who was his early predecessor, but of the same disgusting type, with Oliver Cromwell, of all people, in selling out the nation of England. We'll get to that sometime later. Lord Milton declared the idea of outlawing the use of young children in chimneys overly hasty, since only very small children could possibly fit into the narrow flues. It would have required only a small expenditure by a homeowner to have the chimneys altered and widened to permit their cleaning by adults or machines, however. Lord Sidney Smith sneered at the humanitarian appeals for saving the lives of white children impressed into chimney sweeping. "Humanity," observed Smith, "is a modern invention." Lord Smith further stated that such a measure for the reform of the chimney sweep trade, we are convinced from the evidence, could not be carried into execution without great injury to property. From the Works of Sidney Smith, Volume 2, page 95. In the English Parliament, property rights were ruled paramount when legislation was proposed for preserving the lives and health of poor white children. Property rights were ruled to be of secondary consideration, however, when the cause of emancipating Negroes came to the fore. During this time, the atrocities visited upon the white children who climbed inside the chimneys of the wealthy was of little consequence, compared with the massive attention given to the condition of the Negroes of America. When Parliament abolished Negro slavery in 1808, the flues of its august chambers were being climbed by boys 4, 5, and 6 years of age, sold to chimney sweepers for prices ranging from a few shillings to 2 guineas. The smaller the child, the better the price. George L. Phillips, page 3. David Ricardo, commenting upon the attempt to protect child laborers, wrote that the legislature must not be allowed to infringe on the rights of the owners of property. Inglis, page 166. Unless, of course, that property was a black slave rather than a white one, where the enslaved white children who served as human brooms came to the attention of the public at all, it was usually in terms of drollery and the picturesque. The English essayist Charles Lamb painted a rosy picture of their sufferings, celebrating them as a kind of charming, aesthetic prop, a delightful spectacle of almost clergy imps, decorating the roofs of London from their little pulpits, the tops of chimneys. In 1822, Charles Lamb's often quoted praise for chimney sweepers appeared in the London Magazine to bring a smile to the reader's face as he noted the author's kindly yearning towards these dim specks, poor blots. He could enjoy the whimsical scene of the shivering black-hued boy drinking his morning dish of salop tea, to be amused by the little fella, his poor red eyes, red from many a previous weeping and soot-inflamed. Lamb, although successful in provoking a chuckle, did not attempt to bring a tear to the reader's eye. He might refer to the kebed heels of early dawn working hours, the ragged and filthy clothes, the red-rimmed eyes. Yet with the magic of romanticism, he wove the facts of hardship and sorrow so deftly into the fanciful imagery that the misery of the boys is softened and lost sight of, as if chimney sweepers and climbing boys had been translated to the world of Restoration comedies. From George L. Phillips, page 31, Inglis, page 167. The most striking illustration of this upper-class attitude of depraved indifference to the agony of poor white children can be seen in the case of Mrs. Elizabeth Montagu, a very rich lady who took Lamb's whimsy to greater heights, and regarding herself as a patroness of London's penurious children, actually had extra chimneys constructed on her Sattleford Priory, so that climbing boys might have the pleasure of sweeping them, and she the pleasure of observing the children's sport. George L. Phillips, page 31. The lives of poor white children continued to be sacrificed even when machine cleaning became feasible without alterations of any kind being made to flues. In 1828, Joseph Glass improved the design of a chimney cleaning machine invented earlier by George Smart. The new modifications rendered the cleaning of every flue by means of the contrivance an inexpensive and efficient means of foregoing child labor for the purpose. The device was mostly ignored by the masters of sweeps and homeowners alike because English boys cost even less than the affordable cleaning machine. The cost of Glass, his machine, with a ball and brush amounted to £4, yet sweeps preferred boys whom they could easily obtain in almshouses or on the streets. They made the boys beg their food, so their upkeep was almost nothing, whereas the machine was liable to wear and tear. The child was forced to work, often when he was ill. Moreover, the machine required the combined efforts of a master and journeyman. The child sweep the chimney unaided. George L. Phillips, page 34. It is possible, asked the reformer J.C. Hudson, quote, that women whose love of infants is said to be so strong can persist in employing little children for this purpose? Well, the answer was yes. Samuel Roberts' in 1834 essay on the boys used as chimney sweeps addressed his indignation towards the upper-class British females who met in their sumptuously appointed parlors to weep with the tender-hearted solicitude over the latest accounts from America of oppression of Negroes, while in the next room, scarred and burned 5-year-old English boys as enslaved as human brooms were being forced up the lady's chimney without a thought for their welfare. There is a race of human beings in this country, the chimney sweepers, climbing boys, which is more oppressed than the Negroes in either the West Indian Islands or in North America. These objects are all young and helpless. Their employment is tenfold more horrible than that of any attaching to the Negro slaves. A far greater number of them are crippled and rendered deformed for life. A far greater proportion of them die in consequence of hard usage, while the horrible deaths from suffocation, burning, and other accidents are in this case beyond measure more numerous. And all this at home, within our knowledge, before our eyes, in our very houses. How many of these poor infants arrive at years of maturity? Of those who die young, who knows or cares anything about them? The death of any of your favorite dogs would be more lamented. From an address to British females, pages 11 to 77. Now, next time I will pick up at breaking the chains of illusion, but consider this. What stopped the horrible brutality towards these young white children? And what stopped Negro slavery in the Americas? And remember, they didn't pay a bit of attention to the white slavery in America. What stopped the brutality towards innocent, defenseless white children was that those who call themselves Christians did something. They did what was right. That is the same thing that stopped Negro slavery in the Americas. Remember that there was no Christian around to stop any of these institutions. In the Far East, the land of the Arabs, where both whites and blacks were taken, and they never increased in number because they were always castrated, or the women were used as sex things, as were the children, boys and girls. And it was white Christians. Now, I'm not saying there were no Christians of any other color, race, or language that helped this effort. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, by and large, it was the masses of white European Christians who did something, who stood up, and their religion to them was more than just talk, that did something about this. And that is the only way that any of the crimes that are still being committed against all of humanity, and specifically whites today, is going to stop. I am in no way saying that the lives of whites are more important than the lives of blacks, browns, yellows, any nation, language, tribe, or tongue. But the story of the depravity and criminality towards whites has not been told, and it is not being told today. Has any of you looked into what is going on in South Africa? Not to mention Europe. We as a people have been criminalized where there is no reason for such accusations, and it is only those who bear the name of Christ who are going to stand up and do something about it all. Till next time, I pray that you do well.